Hi, Kipsters. Welcome to another week of reading. This week, we're still reading from the Frog and Toad Are Friends book, but we're going to be reading a new chapter. This chapter is called A Lost Button. So we're going to find out what adventure Frog and Toad are going to go on this week. Kipsters, today while I'm reading A Lost Button, you're going to work on identifying the problem or problems in a story. And this story is kind of special because it has a big problem, but we're also going to be looking for lots of little problems. A Lost Button. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here's your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button is white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with the 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed. "The whole world is covered with buttons and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor, he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad. "It was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. And Kipsters, that's the end of A Lost Button. The first thing that I'm going to do today is identify the big problem from last week's story when Miss Alatif was reading. Last week when she was reading Frog and Toad Are Friends, Spring, we know that the problem was that Toad did not want to get out of bed. He said that he was not going to get out of bed until May. That was the big problem. So today, you're going to work on identifying the big problem for a lost button. So right now, I want you to take a few seconds and think, what was the big problem in our story today? We're thinking. Oh, I can see you thinking super hard. Now that you have your idea, we're going to go ahead and answer that question on our paper. So if you don't have a piece of paper and a pencil, pause this video and go grab one now. Now that we're all ready to answer our question, right now, you're going to write the big problem in today's story, and then you're going to tell us all about the big problem. And tomorrow, we're going to be focusing on the small problems. If you want to go back and read this story all by yourself, check it out on epic.com, and we'll see you tomorrow.